Hi everybody. Today I'm going to be doing a read aloud called Three Names, and this story is by Patricia McLaughlin and pictures are by Alexander Pertzoff. I do have to mention this is a Scholastic book, so I do have permission from Scholastic to be making this video. I decided to pick this book because this is a picture book by Patricia McLaughlin, but I also have a small chapter book called Journey that I would also like to start reading. So I figured I'd start with this one and then later in the week maybe post some chapters from this story, Journey. So we're going to start with this one today. This is called Three Names by Patricia McLaughlin, pictures by Alexander Pertzoff. I always like to read at the beginning of books who they're dedicated to. I think it's important and it says a lot about who wrote it, like who the author was kind of thinking about when they wrote this book. And it kind of, I really think, makes that connection to readers that the person that wrote this book is a real, human being who has real feelings and real things going on in their lives. So this says, this book is for Charlotte Zolotow with love. And that's from Patricia McLaughlin. And then the illustrator said, to Liv and Anna. When my great-grandfather was young, 100 years ago, he likes to say, but that's not true, he went to a school on prairie roads in a wagon pulled by horses. He wore overalls with buckles at his shoulders and leather high-top shoes that took a long time to lace. 100 years, my great-grandfather says, but of course, that is not true either. His dog, with 3 names, went too. How can a dog have 3 names? I asked. He came to us one day without a name, said great-grandfather. My sister Lily called him Ted. Mama called him Boots because his front legs were white halfway up. Papa called him Pal because he was one. Great-grandfather called him 3 names. That's 4 names, I told him, but he already knew that. On the first day of school, 3 names pranced and danced around the wagon. Mama looked me over to make sure I was clean from summer dirt. Great-grandfather said, Papa kissed me on one cheek and then the other. He smiled at Mama, who went behind the clothesline sheets to cry. Great-grandfather's mother always cried the first day of school for her own reasons. Lily drove the wagon because she was the oldest. It was a long way to school, nearly 3 miles. Once we walked. Did you get lost? I asked. You couldn't get lost on a prairie road, my great-grandfather told me. You couldn't get lost with 3 names along to show you the way home. Three Names liked school. He liked the teacher, Mr. Beckett, who brought leftovers for him. He liked the children, except for William, who was sly. 3 Names frowned at William, said great-grandfather. I have never seen a dog frown, I said. 3 Names frowned, he said. Lily drove the wagon down the road to William's house as 3 Names stood in the back, his ears up, his tail wagging in circles. The children climbed up in the wagon laughing, Rachel and Maddie and William with their slates and tin pails of lunch, and 3 Names always frowned at William. The wagon rounded the pond, a slough, great-grandfather called it. The wagon passed fields of prairie grass and wheat, paintbrush and bluegrass, and 3 Names barked at what he saw. He barked at the sharp-tailed grouse that flew up, frightened. He barked at the prairie dogs that stood in the fields, their eyes as black as berries. Once great-grandfather told me, 3 Names barked at a cloud that covered the sun. Then, way off in the distance, came the other children, looking small like tumbleweeds. Martha came on horseback and Lou on her pony, then twilling twins who did not look alike walked because they lived close by. George and Jenny were already at school, their horses tethered in the fields eating grass. There was a barn, too, for horses, cool and dark, that smelled of hay and harness leather and old wood. It smelled of Jed, Jenny's pinto, gray-dappled Maud, and Sophie with the white blazed face. Mostly, said great-grandfather, it smelled the old sweet smell of all the years of horses that had ever slept there. Great-grandfather's schoolhouse was small and painted white, just one room with wooden desks and a stove and iron, hooks on the walls for coats. Three Names slept among the coats and boots and gloves. In winter, he slept near the wood stove, thumping his tail when Mr. Beckett opened the door to feed the fire. Sometimes he slept on Great-grandfather's stocking feet, and Great-grandfather felt the beating of his heart. In the side field, there were outhouses, one for girls and one for boys. In winter, no one stayed there long, but once in spring, Lou wrote an entire poem in the outhouse, sitting there quietly. Hello, you cloud-eyed windows, looking through a blue blanket sky. All grades were in Great-grandfather's one-room schoolhouse. George was the oldest, and he taught Great-grandfather long division and how to tie his shoelaces and double knots. Maddie was only 7, and when he cried, Great-grandfather put his arm around him and helped him with the alphabet. Were there 26 letters in the alphabet then like there are now? I asked. 26, just like now, he told me. Great-grandfather ate lunch outside in good weather, with cool water pumped from the well for drinking. Three Names drank water from a bowl and stared into the faces of all the children until they shared their food with him. Great-grandfather played fox and geese in the meadow and hide-and-seek in the barn, but his favorite game was marbles. He carried his marbles in an old sock and drew a circle in the dust, and everyone took turns. Jenny was the champion, but once Great-grandfather won a pot of marbles. He kept his lucky Aggie. This Aggie is 100 years old, he said, like me. In the fall, the wind came up, snapping the sheets on the clothesline dry, and the nights were crisp like apples from the root cellar. The horses didn't like the wind, and once they ran so fast that Lily couldn't stop them. She held on tightly, and Three Names didn't bark all the way to school. In winter, the children rode on a sleigh if the snow wasn't too deep. Mr. Beckett rode to school early, before the sun rose, to build the fire to warm the schoolhouse. Some days he roasted potatoes in the stove, and the whole room smelled of warm potatoes and butter from a crock and firewood. Three Names ate a potato, too, all but the skin. At winter holidays, there was a party at the schoolhouse for everyone, Great-grandfather said. All the children and parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles. A candle burned in every window of the school. We could see the lights from a long way off, tiny beacons in a sea of snow. There was food and punch and singing, and Mr. Beckett gave each of them a book for a gift. Martha played her fiddle, and Three Names lifted his head to howl at the rafters. Spring came and the snow melted slowly. The earth was dark and wet, and the slough filled with water. Sometimes Three Names jumped off the wagon to walk into the slough, lifting his head happily, scaring the birds. There were spring storms and sometimes tornadoes, with thin, dark clouds tunneling down from the sky. The children ran to the cellar where it was safe, and Mr. Beckett told stories by lamplight as the wind made a roaring noise all around, and Three Names trembled. Once after a storm, we found someone's outhouse behind the barn, blown there by the wind, said Great-grandfather. Another time, Mr. Willick's old horse, Annie, appeared, a little mussed to eat grass with the others. And then, too soon, it was the last day of school. Spring had turned to summer, and dust hung in the air. The grasses had turned snap-brittle. There was a celebration, and everyone came dressed in white starched shirts and calico and shiny shoes. I wore new knickers of corduroy that whispered when I walked, said Great-grandfather. There was lemonade and cookies, and Great-grandfather made Three Names close his mouth so he wouldn't howl when Martha played her fiddle. There was a speech by Mr. Beckett and one by George because he was graduating. I am happy, said George, but I am sad, too. Everyone was sad, said my great-grandfather, because school was over. Even Three Names was sad, sitting silent in the wagon all the way home, watching the prairie stretched out like a quilt all around. 100 years ago, when great-grandfather was young, summer was fine, full of long, warm days and nights when the moon rose yellow. But he missed school. Three Names missed school, too, said great-grandfather. Every day he stared down the prairie road. Every day he pranced and danced around the wagon. And when the locusts buzzed in the summer grass and great-grandfather lay in the barn hay, Three Names would nudge him with his cool, wet nose. No, Three Names, not school time, but soon, I promise, he'd whisper. Soon. And Three Names would turn around 3 times and sigh. settling like a sack of grain beside my great-grandfather, the two of them dreaming away the summer, the two of them waiting for school. Although it's not summer here quite yet, I think a lot of us are like Three Names right now. We are waiting to get back to school. We are waiting and hoping that the day will come where we can all get back together. So I really like this book, and I wanted to share it with you today. This is Three Names by Patricia McLaughlin, pictures by Alexander Pertzoff. And like I said, I'm going to be starting, this is a short little chapter book called Journey, and this is also by Patricia McLaughlin. She is also the author of a more well-known book, Sarah Plain and Tall. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you all are staying healthy and staying home. Have a great day.